Hello and welcome back to The Sober Connection with me, Abby King. Today we're talking about something I've become increasingly curious about over the last few years, the connection between neurodivergence and alcohol dependence. Research suggests that people with ADHD are significantly more likely to develop problems with alcohol than people without ADHD, and it's something that really interests me because although I'm not currently diagnosed, I've recognized a lot of potential ADHD traits in myself since getting sober. In particular, I've become much more aware of just how much I used alcohol to quieten the noise in my head, switch off, and regulate how I was feeling. My guest today is autistic and ADHD and spent years struggling with drugs and alcohol before getting sober. So I was really interested to talk to her about her own experience and what she understands about herself now that she didn't back then. Before we get into it, I do want to make it clear that neither my guest or I are trained professionals in neurodivergence. This isn't medical advice, and we're not here to diagnose anyone. We're simply two people talking about our lived experiences and some of the patterns that we've recognized along the way. So today, I'm delighted to welcome Nicola Rees to the Sober Connection. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Hi, you okay?
I'm good, thank you.
Eventually.
All right. So, and thank you so much for joining me today. It's really cool to meet you. We've sort of been following each other for a while on social media, so it's nice to finally have a proper catch up. So, for people who are meeting you for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and where alcohol and drugs first entered the picture for you?
So yes, hi. Yeah, so my name's Nicola. I'm an alcoholic in recovery, coming up to 3 years now. And I'm, I'm a multifaceted human being. I'm a mum. I was a businesswoman. I started, I had the normal introduction to drinking, like, a lot of teenagers did during the sort of the noughties kind of times. And, looking back now, there was a lot of, I never knew where to stop. So I'd always take it that little bit further. I'd be the one who went sick. I'd be the one who ended up in, I have memories of a carnival when I was about 14, 15, and I ended up passed out in a bush, things like that, but it was normalized. It was almost like, it was a cultural thing, especially in
Yeah.
the UK. So, but then I progressed on to, stimulant drugs, speed, not so much cocaine at that point. Speed was very easily sort of accessible. And I realized that I used to, for about 2 years, I used it when I wasn't going anywhere. So
Yeah.
I would be my brothers owned like a pub, and I'd help out there sometimes, and it would be empty. There would be no party, there would be no nothing, but I would still take it, and it would almost like level me out. And it was something at the time that I never really thought about. But I stopped, by the time I sort of got to sort of my late teens, I stopped, and actually I didn't drink for a long time. I was one of those that when we went clubbing or we went anywhere, I would drive, because
Right.
I think I'd always had that need to control an environment from some childhood stuff. So I was happy, not drinking. It was never something that I had to do all the time. So,
Hmm.
that was when I sort of first started. And then I had my children, and yeah, things changed a lot after that.
Right. Okay. Can you explain?
Yeah. So, yeah, um, I had what happened was my mum died very, very suddenly of a heart attack. She was walking to work one day. I was 7 months pregnant with my son, and I was 25 at the time, 24, 25. And I had a phone call in the morning from my dad saying, "Oh, your mum's fallen. I don't know what's happened. She's gone to the hospital. You better go, and meet us there."
Yeah.
And I arrived at the hospital, and I remember saying to whoever was with me, "Oh my God, the lights aren't even on. It can't be an emergency. She must have broken a leg or something." And the ambulance guys came in, and I said, "Oh, where is she?" And they said, "I'm really sorry, your mum's died." And
Wow.
my world just split from that
Yeah.
moment. But I was pregnant. you know, and I went on 2 months later to, I went into labour. I had a very, very complicated labour. I was in labour for 3 days, and then I ended up having an emergency general anaesthetic because both my life and the baby's life became, you know, hanging in the balance, to say the least. And I struggled, you know, but the mad thing was there was no conversations of loss or now you should grieve or do you need support. It was all feed the baby, do the breastfeeding, be happy, you know, you've got a child, wow, wonderful. And I was grateful, but I had lost the most important person in my life 2 months ago in the most horrific and, you know, sudden way. And then straight away it was, well, you know, but be happy and be good. And I slipped into, you know, postnatal depression to begin with. And unfortunately that went on to postnatal psychosis, which is something I don't really talk about a huge amount. And especially at the moment, because there's a lot in the press about postnatal psychosis and everyone has their different experiences of it. But it was a very, very difficult time for me. But the people around me didn't seem to understand about it, you know, and I was alone, you know, I felt really, really lonely. I hadn't even begun grieving my mum yet. I had a baby. I had my other daughter, who was a few years older. And you know, my husband at the time was he was a very driven, very success-focused kind of person. And it was always, you know, I remember the first time I drank to quieten everything, really, we were going to a christening and I said, I can't go. I can't face people because obviously I hadn't drank for a while now. So my ADHD and my autism were really you know, I didn't want to see, you know, there was layers obviously, but the you know, the social anxiety, the ruminating, the overthinking, all that came back, flooded me, you know. And I said, I can't go. And he said, well, of course you've got to go. You know, you can't not come. Go and put a dress on. Go and put some makeup on. You'll feel better. You know, that was the attitude. And I remember thinking, I cannot do this. And at the time, we had like a room in the back of the house where it was like a storage room and there was a fridge there. And there was always, you know, there was a bottle of wine that somebody had given us. That, you know, I didn't drink much. And I went back to the fridge and I grabbed a small bottle of beer and a little bit of this wine and I necked it. And I think that is when that moment sticks with me because it was almost like, right, I need to override how I'm feeling now in order to function for everyone else.
Yeah.
And as I say, from there on in, I had, you know, I went on to have my youngest daughter who is also autistic. And I learned to mask much more. You know, I was masking anyway, but I learned it on a huge scale. As I say, I was a lawyer. My husband was in business and he was quite successful. And it came about the image, you know, and I kept putting things, I kept buying things and putting things in front of me because I did not want anyone to see who was underneath all of this. And progressively, as you know, had I got off then, who knows? But it progressed. And this is what I tried to say. It's a progressive disease, you know, so everyone says, oh, but I didn't hit rock bottom and I didn't do this and I didn't do that. It's not a competition. It's really not a fucking competition, you know?
Yeah.
It's progressive. And if you don't get off now, shit will hit the fan further down. And that's what happened to me. You know, fast forward 14, 15 years of, you know, drinking and having bouts of sobriety, bouts of, okay, I went through the mental health system. I was diagnosed with varying mental health condition. And the mad thing is when I had my diagnosis, the way I described my brain, you know, I always say it's like Iron Man when he goes like that and all the screens open, you know, that's what my brain is like all the time. And, you know, I don't just think of the next thing, I think of the next 10 things. And then it's like, it spurts off into like a little spider diagram. But it's not even that, it's the rumination. And it's like, the way I speak to myself sometimes is the most cruel, hurtful, awful. You know, if that was a Spotify recording, nobody would play that in their brains, you know. Yeah, fast forward then, you know, a good few years, I had some really, really bad, you know, I'd had multiple suicide attempts, I'd self-harmed, I'd spent time in hospitals, I'd spent time in A&Es, you know, it was bad. It was really bad. It's, you know, I'd done all the destructive stuff. And I went to, so I was, during this time, I've also got chronic illness. So I've got ankylosing spondylitis and rheumatoid arthritis. So within this time, the GPs started prescribing me tramadol, codeine. I also had benzodiazepines for my anxiety. So, you know, I was on a huge amount of strong drugs, but I was still, you know, I was on the PTA, I was running the business, I was picking the kids up, I was doing everything.
Yeah, still functioning.
I don't really know. But anyway, what happened, you know, what got me well, the start of what got me well, then I should say, is we went to Florida on a family holiday. And we stayed in this Disney hotel right next to Epcot. Everything was fine. And I thought, you know, naively, this is how naive I was to the fact that I was an addict. You know, I'd been on these tablets for 10 years. I'd been drinking for 10 years and more. And I said, well, you know, my husband at the time, you know, he had his suspicions that, you know, but he didn't look at it in a, I want to help you. He looked at it from a, you fucked up and, you know, you're a mess. And it was, you know, so it just made me go to ground really and hide more. And I'd done the whole, you know, hiding bottles in every single place. I used to hide them on my walk, you know, litres of vodka every sort of 100 metres or so in the hedge, so that when I went for a walk, I could neck the vodka, you know, all those things were happening by this point. But I thought, well, okay, we're going to be in the happiest place on earth, apparently. You know, I'm going to be relaxing for 2 weeks. I'm going to not take my medication with me. I'll leave it at home and I'll stop taking it. So halfway across the Atlantic, I started to go into withdrawals. And I went to the lady in the back and I said, can I have a drink, please? And she said, oh, sorry, we've just served. I said, yeah, I know. And I'd had 2 of the small, you know, the vodka thing. I said, yeah, I said, I need more. And I was, you know, I was irritated by now. And she said, how many do you need? I said, can I have 3? And she said, okay, fine, you know. So I had 3 and I was a mess. That wasn't enough, you know, it wasn't enough for my body. And long story short, 3 days into the holiday, I was surrounded by armed police in Disney World because I had gone into psychosis.
Oh, wow.
From alcohol, well, from the, I think it's more so from the benzodiazepines and the opioids, really. And my kids, my poor kids, you know, they had to watch that and they had to go through that. And but it was what made me think, this is, you know, I walked across an interstate absolutely out of it to buy vodka and nearly killed myself. You know, I was hallucinating. I would go downstairs in the morning at 6 o'clock and go into the Disney guest shop and you could buy little plastic wine glasses, and I would buy 3 of them and I would sit outside while Chip and Dale was doing the breakfast with the other kids and stuff, you know, and I'd be there necking red wine. I don't even drink red wine, just to get that into my body so that I could function for a couple of hours, you know, until I could get to the next place and the next place. And of course, Disney don't sell a huge amount of alcohol, hence the interstate, me crossing the motorways and just being, and by now, as I say, the psychosis was getting worse and worse. But I didn't stop. I came home and I went even worse, you know, the drink got worse. I didn't think I could get worse than that, but I did. I got worse. And then I was in London in the October, I think it was. And my family just left. They said, you know, my husband said at the time, I can't do this anymore, you know, and he left me there suicidal and just said, no, that's it. You're on your own, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I had a decision to make. And, you know, the decision was that I wasn't going to come away from there, to be honest. you know, in my head, I'd made peace with the fact that I couldn't live anymore in my brain. My brain, you know, people say it's just ADHD. It's not. It's really not. It's a struggle every day. And add alcoholism onto that because you're trying to calm that brain down. You know, I get upset, not because it's current, but because it breaks my heart to think that there could be people living with this now who think that is the only way that they can just shut off that brain, you know, is to just be done with it, because it's excruciating at times, you know. And but for the grace of God, a close relative got in the car, drove 3.5 hours, came to the hotel and said to me, do you know the kindest thing? And obviously, you know, again, I get it, people try to stop people drinking, but when you're an alcoholic, that's the worst thing you can do sometimes, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, she said, she sat on the bed next to me and she said, right, okay, let's go to the shop, let's get you some booze and get you some sweets, and we'll think about what we're going to do in the morning. And you know, that's the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me. And we went, and I didn't, you know, I didn't drink ridiculously. It just kept me level. And then she rang around rehabs locally. And, you know, I was fortunate enough that, you know, the means was there to be able to do that. People clubbed together, people got me help. And I got up in the morning, I went downstairs, I paid the hotel barman an obscene amount of money, and he gave me a travel cup of absinthe, and I sipped that absinthe, and I went into treatment, and I stayed there for 28 days, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but the best.
Yeah.
So, sorry, that's the condensed version as much as I can condense it.
That's in a nutshell. I loved how you I loved how you sort of said that, you know, you're over at Disney at Epcot and that, and then you know, long story short, 3 days later I was surrounded by armed police. I was like, oh whoa, okay. I feel like we've missed a few steps there, but yeah, amazing. Amazing. So into rehab, and so how did that work with your autism and your ADHD? How did it work in that sort of a facility? I know you've sort of said to me before that it's the support isn't there for people that are neurodivergent.
No.
Right. So talk me through that then.
Well, as I say, when I arrived, I was absolutely 10 sheets to the wind. You know, I had to wait for my alcohol level to come down. I was one of the highest they'd seen. So it took a long time before I could start having the Librium and the things that I was going to need to wean myself off. And I didn't want to be there. I'd never been, this is the ironic thing, is I'd never been away from my children, you know, because I didn't have parents. We didn't have anyone to look after the kids. I was, you know, I was with them all the time. So that was a big thing for me. You know, obviously my kids at this point had given up on me a little bit, probably, you know, they were hurt. They were, you know, it was a big thing. But
how old were they at that point, Nicola? Sorry, how old were they then?
My eldest would have been, as I say, so my eldest is my stepdaughter, but she was raised by us. So technically we're like sisters, because she's my ex-husband was older. But yeah, my youngest two, my son was 16 and my daughter was 12, 13.
Yeah. And
she was struggling with her own, you know, undiagnosed autism at the time. And it was a shit situation. I'm not gonna, you know, gloss it over, as much as we are fantastic together now, and we are, you know, my kids and I are really, really close, and we've had a lot of difficult conversations. You know, I don't take away from the fact that it was awful for them. It must have been awful, you know. But yeah, went into rehab and didn't know that I was an alcoholic. Still didn't think I was an addict. You know, I'd had MRI scans. You know, I'd gone to the doctor and said, I must have a brain disease. I'm having a stroke, you know, because shakes and everything. I was totally in denial about it. So, yeah, it was very much the AA way, you know, and we went to meetings every night. Just in a pod outside. And I remember the first time, you know, they'd go around And I'd never said the word out loud. And it was horrific, you know, having to say, hi, my name's Nicola and I'm an alcoholic. It was just awful. But yeah, it was all about, you know, neurotypical recovery. So DBT, which doesn't work for me, doesn't work. I've tried it. You know, things like you're powerless over alcohol. That doesn't work for me. I need an explanation. I need to know why I'm like that. I am. I need something to fix, you know. So all these things there was never a conversation about, you know, there was people there who clearly, you know, some men, and there was some young, you know, heartbreaking. There was some young people there with eating disorders, with, you know, ketamine addiction, and not clearly ADHD, you know, as boys typically present them, you know, what some people think is ADHD. But I could spend 5 minutes with them and I'd think, you know, wow. And I didn't know much about your neurodivergence back then, you know, but there was never, you know, you were an alcoholic because something, you know, something that the steps had to fix.
Yeah.
So anything outside of that, you know, we did talk about codependency, toxic relationships, things like that, which I was, you know, in a situation similar, but there was no conversation and there was no adaptations, you know, at all about that. You know, it was, and it took me, you know, another year after that to get my diagnosis. Really.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I was going to say, when did you, so you got diagnosed after you got sober?
Yes, after, and that's the thing. It was after I got sober, all my, I got more autistic. I got more, I mean, my ADHD was just through the roof because what I hadn't realized was obviously the opioids, the benzos and the drink were medicating something within me. You know, they were medicating that. You know, you think of, you know, the stimulants, all these things, I was self-medicating. But what I didn't understand was what, you know, I thought it could be trauma, I thought it could be this, could be that. And I set about finding out, basically. You know, I started studying, I started asking questions, and slowly but surely these things started to add up. And I thought, oh, okay. By this time, my daughter had her autism diagnosis, and I, you know, James and I were friends for a long time, and I'd suspected that he was autistic anyway. And I started to see, you know, him and her together. And just, well, like, oh my God, you know, they're clearly so, you know, they're very similar and they're autistic and things like that. And I started to see, as time went on, you know, I didn't want to go into public places. I didn't want to, and it wasn't an anxiety. It was as if I was going back to who I always was, without the alcohol and without the drugs. And I was unmasking, you know, what is what they call it. But I was doing it unknowingly. I was unmasking and I was taking off the layers that had been there. You know, I totally changed my lifestyle. I moved. I, you know, totally stripped myself back. I started from, you know, the beginning again. Rebuilt, you know, I had to rebuild my life. And obviously, you know, my husband and I separated, and yeah, I took the kids and I had to start again, you know. So, and I think that took me back to who I was at my core. And who I was at my core was this, you know, little autistic child who felt too much for the world, you know. And the little girl who used to, you know, talk to her imaginary friends and, you know, make stories up in her brain and, you know, worry about death and, you know, being mauled by dogs.
Yeah.
Because that's what my brain was even as a child, you know?
Right.
This internal thing. So
yeah. So when you finally got your diagnosis, did a lot of it make sense from before the diagnosis? Did you kind of start sort of putting pieces together and like you were just saying, obviously just you became that little girl again, but
100%,
and how you were using alcohol and drugs to become a different person, to mask what you were really like.
100%, you know, it answered so much for me. And initially there was elation. There was, whoa, there was like a sigh in a way, because I thought, I've done bad things. And this is another thing that I think is really important in recovery is, there's a huge amount of thing in about not talking to the addict about, what they've done and things like that. And I agree with that to a certain extent. But at some point in recovery, you have to have these conversations. You have to put your hand up and you have to own that. And that's hard, really hard. And I think once I'd got over that initial part of my recovery, I was ready to look at, the neurodivergence. And when I had my diagnosis, I was really, really relieved. I was happy. I felt validated for the first time. I had seen countless mental health professionals. And I was just given more medication, more antidepressants, more pills, dum.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I had my diagnosis, there was that sense of validation and understanding, really. However, then that subsides, and now I'm in that grieving process almost now. I'm in that stage of well, this is the reality, and they offered me medication for it. And for the moment, I'm trying not to take the medication, and I'm trying to adjust my life. Now, that's not possible for everyone. And I've said this in a few of my posts. I'm not anti-medication at all. There were times when my kids, I know it doesn't look like I survived it. Well, I did survive it, but actually having the antidepressants and all those medications that I took, yes, they became a problem, but they saved my life and they allowed me to function, call it functioning, call it not, they got me to where I am, as did my alcoholism. I truly believe that my alcoholism saved me, in the most destructive and awful way. It did a job, and I can see that now. I have no doubt in my mind I would not be here if it wasn't for some of those, unhealthy coping strategies, because that's what they were, and that's not me glossing over it. That's not me, not taking responsibility. That's not me making an excuse. I want people to understand that, because I'm not. This is not, and then there's a saying, isn't there? It's not your fault, but it's your responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, that I sort of truly believe in. And I'm always there to, I'm always putting my hand up and saying, I fucked up. I royally, totally fucked up. However, let's have these conversations and hope that the next generation, like my daughter now, as I say, she's autistic. And when she went out for the first time, she went a little bit OTT. And, I can have that conversation with her. I can say to her, you do know what alcohol is doing to you and why you're doing this. So if you need to be pissed to be in a room, maybe that room isn't for you.
That isn't for you. Yeah.
And she's learning that slowly, because I want her to be able to, I don't want her to have to be like me, put on the fancy clothes, wear the fancy bag, put your bloody hair, put your mask on, your war paint on. Why? Because we feel like we don't belong somewhere. Well, don't fucking go there then. But it's easy for us to say that. It's not so easy when you're a people pleaser and you want to do everything to help everyone. So it's answered a lot of questions for me. And I've as you said, I am not professing. I'm not an expert. I'm not. All I can speak to is my experience. But I study social sciences. I'm doing a social sciences degree now. And I would urge anyone who is questioning their relationship with things to look into, why, and it's not always neurodivergence. I'm not saying, that's not, there's a lot of different things, but, and this isn't me slagging off AA or anything, because it's an amazing organization, and it helped me immensely when I first came out of treatment. And I'm still friends with a lot of, people in the fellowship now, and it's really important, and I support it 100% for the people it works for.
Yeah.
However, for me, and being told I'm powerless, as was never gonna. I needed to understand what was underneath it all, why it was happening, what were my genetics doing, what were my epigenetics doing, why I am like I am, why am I an addict, why am I an alcoholic,
Yeah.
and there are answers. There's a lot of answers, and there's a lot of research coming out now. The way the world works, this will probably land as mainstream in about, I don't know, 8.5 years. But it's there. People are doing this work, and it's an incredible work they're doing. But I think when you have a brain that literally does not stop, and as soon as your eyes are open, there is constant noise, why would you not want to switch that off now and again?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It makes perfect sense when you look at it, and these conversations are happening, and I'm so happy that people are having these conversations. And it's not an excuse. It's not a get in a jail free card. It's not a, I've seen a lot of people commenting on things lately about somebody who's some famous celebrity who said something about his autism. And yes, it's destructive when these messages, but you will always get, we can always say there's pros and cons to every single conversation. There will always be people who are on different sides of the fence. Take what you need and leave the rest.
And leave the rest, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's the important part.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Did you have to learn completely new ways of regulating yourself once substances weren't available anymore?
Yes. And
what were they?
Do you know what? I'd love to say that I was one of these people who got into triathlons or something, but
no, me neither.
Yeah, no, I see some people, and I think it's different. Everyone's different. It's like, my partner now, he's, he goes for his walks, he goes to the gym, he's autistic, so he needs, that regimented thing, and that's his way of regulating, that's fine. Yeah. Me, I think obviously I've studied functional nutrition, so I've gone down the holistic route a lot, and I'm not going to lie, there are times, there are things I use, because I understand my hormones, because obviously PMDD is a big part of my story as well, and I've I've had to really sort of understand my hormones, my detoxification pathways, all that kind of stuff. So I think that I naturally, in time, this is not a quick fix. And this is why I don't, people ask me sometimes, oh, do you have a workbook? Or do you have this? Or do you have that? And I'm like, it's really hard because everyone's individual, everyone's got different genetics, everyone's got different, bodies and things like that, But for me, I think I can slip into burnout or shut down quite easy, but I can see it coming now.
Yeah.
And a big thing is, this Instagram account. As much as I said, I'm just going to do it so the Hannah's got someone to read, and that, the kids can understand if they need anything. That's all well and good me saying that, but I'm not, I can call myself out of my own bullshit sometimes as well, because it's like, I'm there thinking, what can I post? And, do I need to take a picture of this? And do I need to do that? Fucking brain's going all over. And I'm thinking, my God, started this as a hobby. This is not important to you. It's important to me, but it's not like, but again, my ADHD brain is like, hyperfixate on something.
Yeah.
So for me, it's put the phone down, walk away, and get outside. I'm very lucky where I live. There's a lot of countryside. And I know it sounds like such a cliche, because I used to fucking hate people who used to say this. I'm not going to lie. People who used to say, oh my God, I'm going out for a walk in nature, so healing. I used to be like, piss off, It used to get on my nerves. But it's true. I become that person. I'm like, who the hell am I? I'm like cringing at myself sometimes because I'm walking around in the flipping trees going like, whoa, this is so relaxing. But it is,
Yeah.
And I did a reel the other day about the whole dopamine thing, because I can see so many people 6, 7, 8 months in, and they're like, I'm not happy, and I'm flat, and I'm this, and I'm that. And I'm like, it takes time. it does take time, you know. You got to think you've been damaging your brain for the best part of your life. It's
Yeah.
not going to come back, you know. So yeah, things that, and food, I hate to say it, you know, again, I've got to be careful because too much sugar for me is not good for my inflammation, which affects my chronic illness. So I can't do thing, but you know, that sweet tooth, you know, I still eat a lot too much sugar. You know, I can be good.
Yeah.
What good things is, but I eat regularly. I don't, you know, even if it's just a protein shake, even if it's like a coffee with a bit of collagen, I have to keep my blood sugar, because that's another thing, you know, the amount of times, and this is a bit sick really, but you know, when I wasn't drinking all day, you know, I'd come home say 4 or 5 o'clock, and I wouldn't eat dinner because number one, I knew deep down it would kind of help the craving, but also first drink didn't hit as well if I'd eaten, you know?
Yeah.
So
eating's cheating.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, you know, I make sure now that I'm more level throughout the day, and yeah, getting outside, doing things like that. I'm not, you know, I do go to the gym now and again. At the moment, I've got a rotator cuff injury, so I can't go. And but I think for me, it's been simplifying my life. So instead of keeping my life as it was and trying to regulate, what I've had to do is make my life a lot simpler. And, you know, my kids are a little bit older, you know, they're teenagers, they're not young anymore. So I'm always careful when I say these things. But again, we live in a rat race. We live on a hamster wheel. We're told we need to buy bigger things, buy better things, go on bigger holidays. So then we need to work harder. You know, we can't do neurotypical. So for me, I try to live a life that I don't have to overregulate if I can. And that means, you know, I don't buy the nice clothes. I don't, you know, I keep my life really, really simple. But also, I'm saving a fortune because I'm not necking bottles of vodka and buying Domino's pizza at 2 o'clock in the morning and hiding it under the bed. And, you know, I'm not making these ridiculous things like, oh my God, I'm going to buy this off Amazon because I really need this, or books that I think is going to somehow solve my life problem. You know, so as I say,
it's all balanced.
It's all balanced. It is all balanced. But also, as I say, you know, I do take the boring things like, you know, make sure that I eat properly as much as I can. You know, things like magnesium, valerian, cheap as chips to buy, you know, things like that. And it really just helps, you know?
Yeah. I did see your post the other day, and I mean, I commented on it, and you were just, you know, there's these Instagram pages that we've got. I mean, mine's different, obviously, because mine's sort of become a bit more of a business, you know, but, you know, that constant, you know, we're constantly trying to stay calm, but then we have this page that we feel like we have to constantly be, you know, what am I going to post today? And I've got to but you know, schedule these posts, and that one didn't get enough likes, and oh my God, you know, and then the brain's kind of overthinking why you're not getting enough likes or follows or whatever, you know, and it's honestly, so exhausting, eh?
It is, you know, and it's like, but I think that's, you know, I'm not going to give you my whole conspiracy theory thing and my whole sort of like where my brain goes in the fact that I think that, you know, neurodivergent people are here to save the world from AI. But there we are, you know, because we are AI. Our brains is ChatGPT. But no, you know, I do, you know, I do think that we are handed an overstimulated version of life, and then we're taught to medicate it, or to buy things to numb it, or, you know, buy more stuff. I was, you know, this is a funny thing actually. I was sorting socks out the other day, and they were just white socks, you know, which is like that pile of doom that everyone has in the tumble dryer that they're like nothing matches. And I held up a sock, and it was a Nike sock, you know, and then there was just a normal white sock, and I was thinking exactly the same, you know, sports sock thing, exactly the same. One had a tick and one didn't. And I just thought to myself, how mental is this? That I have paid £10 more for a fucking tick. They were exactly the same. That's the conditioning of the world we live in that I have paid
Yeah.
£10 for a tick on a white sock, you know? But
Yeah.
that's the way life is, you know, where we live in a capitalist society. We live in a country, well, in countries in the West then, you know, where that is how it is, you know?
Yeah.
I went to Sri Lanka in January and I'd never travelled that far, but it was something I wanted to go somewhere where there wasn't much booze and there wasn't, you know, I can't be doing sitting by a pool all day now with music and bloody people drinking pina coladas. It's not for me, you know.
Yeah.
So I
Not your
wanted
jam
to go
anymore.
somewhere there was a bit more cultural, you know. And
Yeah.
the message, they live so simply, but I've never come across such a happy
Yeah.
people, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, as long as they've sold enough oranges in the day in order to buy food, or they've sold enough of whatever they're selling, you know, you
Yeah.
couldn't buy, you know, you went to the supermarket, there was one conditioner, one shampoo, one shower gel, you know, basic food. You know, there was you couldn't spend money if you wanted to,
Yeah.
you know? And I said, but they were at peace and they were, you know, they lived such simple, non-materialistic lifestyle, but I never saw one of them without a smile on their face.
Yeah.
And I just thought, do you know what? That for me is recovery.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
it
know?
does it makes you realize, right? I just got back from Cambodia and Thailand, and I've been to Thailand a few times, but Cambodia was new for me. And yeah, they're just such happy people. You're right, and it just makes you. It's really humbling, because we come back to this like excess. I mean, I'm pretty. These days I'm not. I don't really feel like I'm materialistic. I'm like all about experiences. So the kids don't really get birthday or Christmas presents. They get an experience, like something that they'll remember, you know? But yeah, I know that like just getting back here, it's almost as soon as you get off that plane, those Western frustrations just reappear, you know?
It's like that, I remember my dad was ahead of his time, bless him. You know, my dad was a drinker when I was young, and a lot of my childhood trauma comes from him, you know. But he became my best friend and an amazing, amazing man that I cannot talk about more highly, but I'm very intelligent man. But he used to say to me as a child, stop absorbing it, Nick. And I'd be like, what? You know, the subliminal, he used to tell me about, I was like 6 and this man was trying to explain subliminal messaging to me. You know, when he was younger, they used to put it in cinema screens, apparently, like little bubbles coming up. And he used to say to me, you know, stop absorbing it. And that's a big thing for me is, you know, we are bombarded with little subliminal messages throughout our day, you know, without realizing. And I think that's what I'm trying to learn to do is, you know, worry doesn't change the outcome. It doesn't. But absorbing all these micro messages throughout the day for for brains like ours, especially like somebody whose brain works differently, we're not neurotypical. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? You know, we're still trying to fit into a neurotypical world, but that's going to put, you know, that's putting a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
And it's never going to fit. You know, we can adapt, we can try. And I think that's the conversation that has to happen, isn't it? You know, is why do we do that? You know, why can't we be okay with, you know, accepting, you know, it's a disability. It is a disability, you know, and it can, you know, for a lot of people, again, it's a spectrum. You know, these things are spectrums. It's like alcohol use. It's a spectrum, you know, and that's why I think anyone, you know, that's why you know, I've said to you about you know, I see some people posting stories of themselves sitting in a hospital bed, you know, on life support and things like that, and I just think that's what that does to me is what if that, you know, what if the you know, the mum of 2 or 3 is sitting at home and she's thinking, oh God, that bottle's gone and I'm opening another bottle. But hey, I'm not on life support and I'm not drinking a litre of vodka a day and I'm not doing this. She's not going to get help, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that whenever somebody wants to get off that train, they can get off it, you know, and we should support that. We shouldn't, you know, I can't stand these rooms where you sit in where it's like you know, I fucked up my life Olympics. Who cares who had it worse? You know, everyone's entitled to stop drinking when it becomes a problem for them. Comparison is irrelevant, you know.
Yeah.
We can all,
Yeah.
you know, and as I say to you, I've shared these things with you today, not because I'm, saying. I think all experiences are important, because sometimes people see themselves in someone and they think it sows the seed, doesn't it? And that's important, that we support all modes. And this whole, sobriety and recovery being, has to follow a certain path or has to follow a certain thing, otherwise you're out of the club. No, we have to respect everyone's journey and support them in whatever works for them, because we're all different,
Yeah.
But so I'm going to get off my soapbox now.
No, you're right. I mean, you're totally right. I've had a client that I've been working with for the last few months, and when she first started working with me, she'd listened to all my podcasts religiously, and she sort of said, "Well, I don't think I'm that bad. I've listened to some of your stories, like my story, for example, and stories of other guests that I've had on, and I don't see myself as being that bad." And I was like, but that's irrelevant, it doesn't matter, because if it's becoming a problem, it's becoming a problem, right? It doesn't matter whether you're right at the bottom of like rock bottom, or whether you're just thinking that it's sort of the hangovers are getting a bit much, or it's fucking with your sleep,
but the fact you're thinking about it, and caveat, big huge caveat, if you're a woman, you're over 35 years of age and you're still drinking alcohol, but yet you're having, you're not sleeping, your periods are shit, you're having PMT to the point you want to kill somebody. Sorry, that was not, given the current situation, I shouldn't have said that, but you know what I mean. I meant it in jest. Your rage is, like red room. At the end of the day, if you're still drinking alcohol, you're not detoxifying your estrogen, your progesterone is tanking, your whole body, your liver is going to prioritize getting rid of that poison before it does anything else. You're not going to lose weight. You're not going to do this. So if you're running 5K, eating a lettuce every day, but you're drinking a bottle of wine.
Still having a bottle of wine.
So even if people want to do it just because, do you know what? I want to be healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was actually the other thing that she related it to, and I mean, she's doing amazing. She's doing so well now, but it was just always very interesting that, I think it's menopause. I think it's the menopause, every single symptom was because of the menopause. And I was like, well, let's just quit out the alcohol and see how you feel after that, So it's interesting. But I mean, alcohol just gets such a green card in so many instances in our lives that, it's
I see it in the supermarkets all the time. I was in Tesco's the other day in the UK, and when you go to the tills, there's buzzballs in the fridge, or small cans of gin and tonic. But
wow.
A couple of years ago, Tesco's made a big, huge public announcement. They were removing chocolate and sweets from the till area because it's not good for children. But they can put buzzballs.
But then they put gin and tonic.
Yeah,
right.
Wow. And I say, people just walk past them and they think that's fine. But what if they put a syringe there and a spoon and and some sort of illicit drugs that have a bad rap? I'm sure people would have enough to say, but there we are.
Yeah.
We can only do what we can do in our little lane.
It's mind-boggling, It's mind-boggling, but what surprised you the most about yourself since you got sober?
What surprised me about myself? I think actually that I can. That's a really good question. I'm not entirely sure of the answer. I think it's for me then, maybe the fact that that I can do this.
Yeah.
Because and this is something that I hope I get across in the posts that I do. I never thought I would be here. Never, and I never saw myself being able to live a sober life and and be happy.
Yeah.
That's the thing, you know. I thought I could be a dry drunk, you know, I could probably do that. I've done that over the years, you know, for periods of times. But I never thought I'd be able to, you know, regulate and be okay, and also have the discussions that I needed to have in order
Mm.
to make my recovery, you know, recover properly then. Because you know, I used to hide from a lot of things. I didn't like talking about it. I didn't like, you know, knowing how I was, you know. So maybe not surprised, but grateful for then, you know, is the fact that I can be honest. I can be honest
Yeah.
now. You know,
Yeah.
I'm pretty much an open book, I think, you know. There's very little things that I don't talk about with my family, you know,
Yeah.
as much as maybe I'm very aware of what I do talk about, you know, because I remember early on, and there's still this guy on YouTube actually that James watches, and I still think, you know, I think there's parts of recovery that some people find helpful when people share them, but for me, I used to find them really triggering, you know,
Mhm.
like, you know, when people used to sort of post about relapses and things like that, it used to kind of make me think, oh, well, fuck it, I can do that then, you know, because they've done it's, I just think, you know, so yeah, so I'm surprised that I'm able to talk about it and be honest without having to re-encounter or, you know, use all the war stories, you know.
Yeah.
'Cause for a long time I felt like, and I think a lot of us who are drinking feel like that. We feel hard done by, you know, there's that poor me, isn't there? Poor me, poor me, poor me, another drink, you know, because we do, you know, I think we go through a stage of, you know, feeling helpless, useless, self-pitying, all that kind of thing, really.
Mm.
But yeah, what surprised me is that my ability to see everyone's point of view now, you know, I don't,
Yeah.
I put myself in other people's shoes. I hold my hand up and I can say, do you know what? That's on me. I'm sorry. And that's something I couldn't do when I was drinking.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Um, for somebody who's wondering whether neurodivergence might be a part of their own story, where would you encourage them to start?
You know, I think that there's so much information now, you know, but you know, unless you're, you know, if you're still following, if your Instagram is, you know, Instagram is made, you know, the algorithm is made to give you more of what you're looking at, isn't it? So if you're
Mm.
not in that conversation and you're not in those following those accounts, you're not going to see yourself. So yeah, you know, have a look, have a Google, have a look, you know. I think the problem is with a lot of neurodivergence is, as there's a lot of overlaps, you know. So again, you know, everyone overthinks, you know, everyone overthinks a bit, everyone has these, but it's the chronicness of it, you know. So we all overthink, you know, we all can be a little bit hyper, we can all have you know, a lot of these symptoms in isolation.
Mm.
But, you know, when they're chronic, they're debilitating, they're affecting your life negatively, they're becoming all consuming, you know, I think, you know, reach out to your healthcare professional, have these conversations. Obviously, there's a huge influx now of, you know, of women who are, you know, hitting perimenopause age, um, and their ability to mask is being taken away, you know.
Mm.
And there's a lot of sort of, there's a, you know, there's a lot of difficult conversations happening in the you know, in that space at the moment. And I think that there's a lot of negativity around it. But what I would say is your experience is your experience. You know, just because somebody tries to minimize that sometimes, or somebody's is worse or better, you know, I think if you feel that it's impacting your life and you
Mm.
feel that you can't cope with these things and you feel that you're identifying with it, well, do you know what? That's your choice and your path. I don't think, comparison, it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum. And I think we are same, there's so much overlaps between addiction, there's so many, different things, because we can't minimize people's experiences because that keeps them stuck
and not asking for help. Yeah. Which is exactly the same as what we were just talking about before with alcohol, right? It's we have to treat everybody's experience as an individual.
I think it's, I'm more autistic than you, or I'm more ADHD than you, or I'm this, or I'm that, or I've got to do a diagnosis. Fucking hell, who cares? Stop. That's all that does, is make somebody feel excluded and makes them feel like shit.
Yeah.
And that's not
what we want. No. Final question: what are you building now that you're no longer trying to numb your way through life?
Gosh, good answer, good question. Well, as I say, I have spent my entire life being a very driven individual, very driven, and for the first time in a very long time, I am just seeing how it goes. So I'm currently studying. I'm doing a lot of writing. I have a Substack and I write on there now and again. It's not like a paid subscription thing. It's nothing, like that. It's just when I feel like I've got something to offload, I will, or something that I think will be useful, I write it. But there's no pressure. And yeah, for once, I don't have a next thing. I'm just seeing where this next thing takes me, which is a very bizarre thing for me, because don't get me wrong, I'm still panicking about what's going to happen in 20 years' time. That's just me. That's never going to change. You're still going to have a 10-year plan, but what that plan is not set in stone, and it's very much developed. I'm more, this again sounds so fucking messy, but I'm all for the journey.
Yeah.
But I am.
It's wanky, but it's cool, right?
What the fuck? But I am. I'm enjoying this. So I'm just going to make the most of this for a bit while I can.
Yeah, that's cool. Where can people find you?
On Instagram, I'm at Nourish Not Numb. The premise was, nourish your body, don't numb your body, but sometimes it isn't really. I don't know why I thought of that name, and I haven't changed it. And
it's great. I love it. It's cool. It's cool. Makes sense.
I'm over there. I'm over on Substack. As I say, I just think that we should be very open with our, time and our, pass it on kind of thing, isn't it? So my inboxes are always open. I'm better with voice notes, just saying. But
I think I got 2 6-minute voice notes from you the other day. I was like, okay, I'll listen to those when I get home. When I'm lying in bed.
No, I know. I say that all the time. I'm like, sorry, it's not going to be a podcast. Thank God, it's you off. But I just feel really. I've always been one that I genuinely don't. I don't like seeing people hurt, and I don't like seeing people suffer. And I've spent a lot of money and a lot of time on trying to get myself well. And I appreciate that I'm very privileged to have been able to do that, And yes, my life has changed now, but I gathered a lot of experience the hard way, over the years. And if I can pass that on to somebody, it's there for the taking. Just ask me and I'll happily help,
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, Nick. Well, thank you so much for coming onto my little podcast today. It's been really cool talking to you. And to all the listeners, I hope you enjoyed our chat. And I will be back next week. But thank you so much, Nick.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.